A man rescues a wounded bear. Years later, it comes back with a shocking surprise. The early morning sun filtered through the towering pines of Pisgah National Forest, casting golden rays across the rugged terrain. Lucas Treadwell, a weary ex-park ranger, did not expect his solitary trek to lead him to a life-altering discovery. But that's exactly what happened, the day he found a wounded black bear lying in the underbrush, whimpering in pain. With no one around for miles, Lucas had to rely on his own courage and compassion to save the injured beast. What he couldn't possibly know was that this single act of kindness would echo through the years, only to return in a way that defied all imagination. Lucas Treadwell had always felt more at home in the forest than in any city street or suburban neighborhood. Growing up in a cramped apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, he had spent his childhood days daydreaming about wide-open spaces and the call of the wild. His favorite pastime was poring over issues of National Geographic, captivated by photographs of majestic landscapes and noble creatures roaming free. The mountains called to him like an ancestral home, even though no one in his family had any ties to such places. When he finally turned 18, he wasted no time packing his few belongings and moving west toward the Pisgah National Forest area, on the outskirts of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Life, however, was not always kind. Lucas's dream had taken a sharp turn when tragedy struck. A wildfire devastated a portion of the forest 2 years after he arrived. He had volunteered to help contain the flames, working tirelessly alongside trained rangers. The sense of camaraderie and purpose he felt in those days was unlike anything he had ever experienced. One park ranger, an older man named Charles Whitaker, saw Lucas's devotion and encouraged him to consider a career in conservation. Inspired, Lucas enrolled in courses at a local community college while continuing to volunteer in the forest. But just as Lucas was finding his path, another blow came. His father, who had stayed behind in Charlotte, passed away from a sudden heart attack. Guilt hammered at Lucas's heart for not spending enough time with his father in those final years. He found himself grappling with sorrow and resentment, all while trying to focus on his newly started training. Stricken with grief, Lucas buried his emotions in his work. By the time he earned the credentials to become a full-fledged ranger, he was a changed man, quiet, thoughtful, intensely focused on preserving life wherever he found it. The forest, with its ever-shifting shadows and gentle breezes, became more than just a place of employment. It became his sanctuary, his solace in the storm of life. Years passed. Lucas had left the official ranger position after departmental budget cuts, but continued to live in a small cabin near the edge of Pisgah National Forest. He made a modest living guiding visitors and teaching wilderness survival courses. In the quiet moments, he tended a tiny garden, read books on conservation, and ventured deep into the forest. Each day, he rose with the sun, taking long walks along trails few others knew existed. One crisp autumn morning, when the leaves were a breathtaking mosaic of gold, red, and fiery orange, Lucas set out before dawn. The trail was subdued under the shifting shadows of a low-hanging mist. His senses, honed by years in the wilderness, alerted him that something was off. There was a tension in the air, a kind of stillness usually signaling distress. He followed a faint whimpering noise, carefully stepping around fallen branches and brush. He scanned the undergrowth until he spotted a blur of dark fur behind a rotting log. The sight made his heart lurch. A black bear, half-grown yet clearly beyond cubhood, lay sprawled on its side. Its normally lustrous coat was muddied and clotted with blood near the left shoulder. The animal's eyes flickered open and shut, as if fighting to stay conscious. Lucas knelt at a safe distance. His initial instinct was caution. After all, bears, even injured ones, could be unpredictable. But the bear's labored breathing and the faint, plaintive moans emanating from its muzzle nudged at Lucas's conscience. Years of training kicked in. He had carried a small first aid kit in his backpack ever since his ranger days. Though it was designed for humans, he hoped it might at least help control the bleeding. The bear's gaze locked onto Lucas, fear mingled with pain in its eyes. Lucas spoke softly, his voice gentle, the way one might speak to a frightened child. "It's all right. I won't hurt you," he murmured, inching closer. He knew the bear could lash out at any moment, but the animal was too weak to move. Carefully, he reached into his pack and pulled out a roll of gauze, some antiseptic solution, and a small pair of scissors. The closer he got, the more visible the deep gash on the bear's shoulder became. It looked like the animal had been caught in a poacher's trap, or perhaps had a run-in with a barbed wire fence. Judging by the dried blood, it had happened at least a day or two ago. The wound smelled faintly of infection. Lucas's throat tightened. There was no doubt in his mind that if he left this bear here, the forest would soon reclaim it in death. He carefully cleaned the wound, wincing at the bear's pained groans. The bear's body trembled, but it remained mostly still, too exhausted to resist. Time seemed to slow as Lucas fought to patch the wound. The antiseptic stung. The bear let out a guttural sound that shot adrenaline through Lucas's veins. Yet he didn't back away. He pressed gauze gently against the laceration and secured it with medical tape as best he could. Eventually, the bear's ragged breathing evened out, its dark eyes fluttering closed in a state of near collapse. Lucas knew he couldn't leave the animal alone to perish. He also knew that moving it would be nearly impossible without help. But in the hush of that moment, alone in the forest, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He would help this creature recover, even if it meant sleepless nights and enormous risk. Guiding a wounded wild bear to shelter was no easy task. Lucas fashioned a makeshift sled from branches, rope, and a tarp he always carried. Using every ounce of his strength, he managed to roll the sedated, limp creature onto the sled. The next several hours were a grueling test of will. He pulled, rested, and pulled again, mile after mile, until the sun sank behind the mountains. By the time he reached his cabin, every muscle in his body screamed for mercy. The cabin, modest and tucked between tall pines, was never meant to house a wild bear. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. With painstaking caution, Lucas maneuvered the creature into a small, covered enclosure he had once used to store firewood. He lined the floor with old blankets and improvised a barrier so the bear wouldn't be able to wander into the rest of the property should it recover quicker than expected. Night fell, bringing with it a cold wind that rattled the cabin's shutters. Lucas fetched a bowl of water and some scraps of leftover fish from his meager pantry. Though he wasn't entirely sure, he believed any source of nutrition might help the animal regain its strength. The bear was barely conscious when Lucas set the food down in front of it, but the faintest flicker of awareness crossed its eyes. Lucas's mind raced with questions. Would the antibiotics he'd given be enough? Did the bear have any internal injuries? And what would happen if it fully recovered? Would it try to attack him, or would it simply vanish back into the woods? Sleepless and tense, he lay in his own bed that night, eyes wide open, listening to the sounds of the wind. An occasional snort or groan from the wounded bear filtered through the walls, a haunting reminder of the precarious path he had chosen. Just before dawn, when exhaustion finally weighed down his eyelids, Lucas thought about his father. He remembered how his dad had once nursed a stray dog back to health, despite having barely enough money for his own medical bills. "We do what we can," his father had said, "because every life deserves a fighting chance." Those words became Lucas's last conscious thought before sleep claimed him. For the next week, Lucas devoted himself to the bear's care. Each morning he inspected the wound, cleaned it with antiseptic, and changed the bandages. Every step was done with utmost caution. The bear was recovering its strength and no longer seemed disoriented. By the fifth day, it could lift its head and growl softly if Lucas approached too quickly. Despite the danger, Lucas felt a strange connection forming. In the bear's dark eyes, he no longer saw only wild fear, but also flickers of trust, or at least acceptance. This hulking creature, which could easily overpower a human under normal circumstances, allowed him to tend the wound without aggressive resistance. As the days melted into weeks, the bear's gash began to close, forming a jagged scar. It began to put weight on the injured leg. Lucas supplemented its diet with fish, berries, and occasionally small game he hunted in the forest. The once pathetic whimpers turned into powerful huffs and deep-throated vocalizations that echoed through the small enclosure. Lucas recognized that the time to release the bear back into the wild would soon be at hand. It was a bittersweet realization. The bond that had formed was unexpected and profound. He would sit outside the enclosure, sometimes reading aloud from field guides or old journals he had kept during his ranger training. The bear would watch him with those dark, enigmatic eyes, occasionally tilting its head or letting out a soft chuff. The boundary between man and beast had blurred in a way Lucas had never thought possible. Yet as the creature's vigor returned, so did its instincts. One morning, Lucas discovered the bear had pushed aside some of the barriers, nearly escaping. The message was clear, it was ready to go. With a heavy heart, Lucas prepared for the release. He loaded an old pickup truck with supplies and fashioned a safer enclosure within the truck bed, ensuring the journey into the deeper forest would be as stress-free as possible for both of them. On a cold, clear afternoon, he drove to a remote location, a place well within the national forest, far from tourist trails. With a gentle coaxing, he freed the bear. For a long moment, the animal stood motionless, seemingly unsure of its newfound freedom. Then, with a final glance over its shoulder, it lumbered off among the ferns and pine trees, eventually disappearing into the dappled shadows. Lucas felt an ache in his chest as he watched it go, an ache that was part relief, part regret. He climbed back into his truck, sat for a moment in silence, and then drove home, feeling the emptiness of his cabin keenly upon his return. Weeks turned to months. The forest transitioned through the rest of autumn into the starkness of winter. Snow dusted the high peaks, and ice coated the streams. Lucas remained vigilant, occasionally wandering the woods to look for signs that the bear might still be near. Paw prints sometimes appeared, but he could never be sure which bear they belonged to. Black bears were common in the region, and none of them wore the makeshift bandage he'd once applied. He returned to his routine of leading guided hikes and offering survival classes, a quiet yearning in his heart that never truly faded. Locals occasionally told stories of sighting a particularly large black bear with a scar on its left shoulder, but they held no proof beyond fleeting glimpses. 4 years slipped away in this manner. The seasons cycled in their relentless dance. Lucas aged, lines etching into his face. Though still physically fit, his pace had slowed. He took more time in the mornings, enjoyed a second cup of coffee, and spent longer afternoons near the forest's edge, simply listening. Life in the cabin became a well-worn rhythm, each day a reflection of the one before it. He often thought back to that first day he found the wounded bear. It had been a moment of incredible tension, fear, and compassion, a moment that reminded him of the fragility of life and his father's words about giving every being a fighting chance. He sometimes wondered if he would ever encounter the animal again, though rationally he believed it had moved on, found new territories, or perhaps succumbed to other dangers in the wild. In the spring of his 41st year, Lucas began to notice strange occurrences around his cabin. It started subtly, a scattering of fresh pine cones on his porch one morning, arranged almost in a pattern. Another day, he found the remains of a fish near his garden. At first, he chalked it up to random wildlife behavior, but the pattern of these gifts, if they could be called, that seemed deliberate. It wasn't until he spotted enormous footprints near his woodpile that he realized something or someone was visiting him intentionally. The prints were undeniably those of a bear, and quite large. His heart pounded as he examined the paw imprints. Could it be the same bear he had rescued all those years ago? The notion seemed far-fetched. Bears in the wild seldom sought out human company unless there was an easy food source. But then again, Lucas had given this particular animal something beyond food, a chance to live when all hope seemed lost. Days passed, and the mysterious signs grew more frequent. Once, Lucas even caught a glimpse of a dark figure at dusk, disappearing into the thick undergrowth. The possibility filled him with a cautious excitement. He started leaving out water near the edge of his property, sometimes small pieces of dried fish. He told himself it was just a gesture, not a bribe, not an invitation. But deep down, he hoped for another encounter, a chance to know if the bond he had once felt was more than just a fleeting illusion. Late one summer afternoon, as golden rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy, Lucas was collecting kindling near his cabin. He froze at the sound of a low, rumbling breath. Turning slowly, he found himself face to face with a fully grown black bear, towering a foot taller than him when it stood on its hind legs. A distinctive scar stretched across its left shoulder. It was the bear he had rescued. The moment felt surreal. The bear locked eyes with him, eyes that radiated intelligence and something else Lucas could only describe as recognition. His heart pounded, yet he felt no immediate fear. Instead, his mind swam with questions. Why had the bear returned? What could it possibly want? He took a step forward, hands trembling. The bear dropped to all fours, letting out a soft, chuffing sound, similar to the ones it had made in its convalescence years ago. Then, to Lucas's shock, it turned and began walking away, pausing only to look over its shoulder as if beckoning him to follow. Against all better judgment, Lucas obliged. He moved slowly, keeping a respectful distance. The bear led him deeper into the forest than he had gone in a long time, weaving among tall pines, crossing a narrow stream and scaling a rocky incline. The sun sank lower, painting the forest in hues of pink and purple. Still, he continued, as though compelled by some silent force of nature. After nearly an hour of trekking, the bear halted near a cluster of boulders. Lucas, panting from the climb, cautiously approached. Then he saw them, 3 small cubs huddled close to a female bear lying motionless on the ground. The female bear's fur was matted with blood. She appeared to be gravely wounded. Lucas's stomach clenched. Her flank rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. The cubs, perhaps a few months old, clung to her side, emitting frightened whimpers. He quickly realized what had happened. The female had likely been attacked maybe by another bear, or even a poacher's bullets. She was losing blood fast. The male bear, the one Lucas had nursed back to health, stood aside, allowing Lucas to approach the dying female. Lucas didn't hesitate. He knelt beside her and checked her wounds. Blood trickled from a bullet hole on her right flank, another near her ribcage. Rage and sorrow boiled within him. Poachers, again, or careless hunters who had no regard for the sanctity of life. In that heart-wrenching moment, all of Lucas's instincts returned. He rummaged through his backpack, extracting the first aid kit he carried for emergencies. With trembling hands, he tried to stop the bleeding, cleaning the wounds as best he could. The female bear stirred, eyes fluttering open, a silent plea shimmering in them. The cubs mewed softly, pressing against her. What astounded Lucas even more was the way the male bear acted. He showed no aggression, only concern, pacing in short arcs around the area. It was as if he trusted Lucas to do the right thing once more. Night descended quickly. Lucas fashioned a makeshift shelter using branches and a tarp, creating a windbreak around the injured female and her cubs. The male bear, the one with the scar, remained on the periphery, ever watchful. Lucas knew the only real chance to save her would be to get her to a proper veterinary clinic that specialized in wildlife. But capturing and transporting a grown female bear and 3 cubs was no simple matter. He stayed with them through the night, tending to the wounds, keeping a small fire for warmth and minimal light. The cubs eventually curled against him, drawn to the warmth of the flames. Their tiny forms and gentle whimpers stirred an overwhelming protectiveness in Lucas. He remembered that the same male bear, now standing guard, had once whimpered in much the same way. At dawn, Lucas made a tough decision. He needed help. Gathering his courage, he left the animals briefly to hike to a nearby ranger station, one of the few outposts that had the resources to arrange wildlife rescue. It took him hours, but he finally arrived and managed to speak with the ranger on duty, a stern but sympathetic woman named Bethany Crowley. He explained the situation in rushed detail, leaving out only the part about following the male bear into the woods, for fear they'd assume he was endangering himself recklessly. To his relief, Bethany quickly mobilized resources. By late afternoon, a specialized team set out with Lucas, carrying tranquilizer darts, collapsible cages, and medical supplies. When they arrived at the site, Lucas braced himself. He worried the male bear might see the humans as a threat. Yet when the rescue team advanced cautiously, the scarred bear merely backed away, making a rumbling noise deep in its chest. Whether it was fear or protective warning, Lucas couldn't be sure. Bethany fired 2 tranquilizer darts into the injured female bear's flank. She groaned, but soon slumped into a sedation-induced sleep. The cubs, startled, scurried behind a boulder. Lucas managed to coax them out gently. Once the team confirmed their sedation as well, they carefully lifted the female onto a sturdy stretcher. The cubs were placed in separate carriers for their own safety. The male bear let out a pained vocalization that echoed through the forest. A part of Lucas broke at the sound. He locked eyes with the male bear and gave a reassuring nod, though he doubted the creature could truly understand. Then, under the fading light, the rescue team and Lucas rushed the female bear and cubs to a waiting truck. Back at the ranger station, a wildlife veterinarian worked through the night to stabilize the mother. Lucas insisted on staying. He watched through a window as the vet extracted a bullet fragment from her flank and stitched up the wound near her ribs. The cubs remained sedated in a safe enclosure, mewling softly in their restless sleep. Exhaustion and worry consumed him. He couldn't fathom losing this new family of bears, not after all the male had risked by bringing him here. When dawn broke the next day, the mother bear was still alive, but her condition was critical. Lucas prayed silently to whatever benevolent force might be listening, his heart heavy with responsibility. Over the next week, the mother bear's condition improved, albeit slowly. She was kept in a specialized enclosure at a nearby wildlife rehabilitation center. The bullet wounds had caused nerve damage, and one lung had been grazed. Yet she clung to life with the tenacity of a creature built to endure the harshness of the wild. The cubs, lively and boisterous, were soon bounding around their own enclosure, though they whimpered whenever separated from their mother. Lucas visited daily, speaking softly to them and checking on the mother bear's progress. By now, word had spread among the local rangers about his extraordinary connection with the scarred male. Most were skeptical. Some dismissed it as pure coincidence that a random bear had led him to the wounded family. Others believed there was something deeply primal, a bond forged in that moment years ago when a wounded creature discovered the gentler side of humanity. Bethany Crowley, who had become something of an ally, began the process of trying to locate any illegal poachers who might have shot the mother bear. Ranger patrols were stepped up, and though arrests were rare in such cases, the forest authorities vowed to do everything possible. As the mother bear regained her strength, the center decided it would be best to release her and the cubs near the area where they had been found. Once she had fully healed, Lucas offered to be part of the release team, certain the male bear would be waiting. Deep in his heart, he hoped that the entire family could be reunited. Finally, one crisp morning, the big day arrived. The mother bear, now capable of walking again, was loaded into a specially outfitted trailer along with her cubs. The journey back to the forest was swift. Lucas rode in the lead vehicle, anxiety thrumming through his veins. They reached the designated area, a quiet stretch of forest flanked by rocky hillsides, with a freshwater stream meandering through just before dusk. When the cages were opened, the mother bear hesitated briefly, then stepped onto the soft pine needles. The cubs followed, tumbling clumsily after her. Lucas stood at a distance, tears unexpectedly stinging his eyes as he watched them sniff the air, reorienting themselves to their natural habitat. A rustling of bushes made everyone tense. Out from the shadows emerged the scarred male bear. He approached slowly, sniffing at the mother and the cubs. The tension among the observing humans was palpable. But the moment turned peaceful as the mother greeted him with a gentle bump of her muzzle against his. The cubs squealed and trotted around him, clearly recognizing him. Lucas found his chest too tight to speak. The ranger team exchanged glances of awe. Rarely did they witness such a poignant reunion. The male and female touched noses, a silent exchange of reassurance. Then, as if acknowledging Lucas's presence, the male bear turned, catching sight of the humans. He gave a low huff, but made no move toward aggression. For a few precious seconds, man and bear stared at each other, a testament to the fragile yet profound link that had formed between their worlds. The group of bears sauntered off, the mother still moving somewhat gingerly, but improving with each step. The cubs scampered at her heels, occasionally stumbling over twigs and exposed roots. The scarred male brought up the rear, casting one final glance over his shoulder at Lucas before they all disappeared into the thick embrace of the forest. Life resumed its gentle cadence. Yet Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his role in the forest went far beyond guiding the occasional tourist or collecting a paycheck. He had become a caretaker of sorts, a guardian not just of the land, but of the creatures that inhabited it. He worked with Bethany and the local ranger forces to strengthen conservation efforts. They organized workshops for local communities, teaching them the importance of coexistence with wildlife. Donations were rallied for upgrading the rehabilitation center's facilities. Lucas even spoke at a town hall meeting, sharing part of his incredible encounter, though he kept the more personal aspects to himself. He advocated for stricter penalties for poachers and those who harmed wildlife. With each passing month, the memory of that family of bears guided Lucas's every action. He ventured into the forest more frequently, sometimes spotting paw prints that could belong to them. The sense of wonder never waned. He reveled in each sign, a cluster of scratched bark on a tree, flattened grass near a favorite resting spot, or an uprooted log that might have been rummaged through for insects. Seasons cycled once again, each bringing its own tapestry of change to Pisgah National Forest. The bustling warmth of spring gave way to summer's emerald glow, then drifted into the fiery colors of autumn before sinking into the silent hush of winter. Through it all, Lucas continued his quiet work of guiding visitors, volunteering with ranger patrols, and keeping a watchful eye on the land he so deeply loved. The memory of his extraordinary encounter with the scarred male bear and its rescued mate still lingered, a source of wonder and silent inspiration whenever he roamed the winding trails. As time passed, rumors drifted through the ranger station, multiple sightings of a large black bear sporting a distinct shoulder scar. These whispers always painted the same scene: the bear was never alone, accompanied by a small brood of cubs, or sometimes a female whose fur bore faint evidence of old injury. Local hikers occasionally reported glimpses of the family at dawn or dusk near streams, searching for fish or berries. Others spoke of discovering fresh paw prints alongside the forest's lesser-traveled paths, the tracks weaving in and out of clearings where the undergrowth lay flattened, as though well-trodden by playful cubs. Lucas felt a familiar thrill each time he heard such stories. He recalled how the female bear, left for dead by poachers' bullets, had been brought back from the brink of death. The notion that she might now be raising not just her original cubs, but a new litter, was as moving as it was miraculous. On nights when the wind sighed through the pines, he allowed himself to imagine how the cubs might look scrambling over fallen logs, pouncing on insects, occasionally rolling in the springy moss with the unbridled joy of youth. It wasn't just a testament to the mother's resilience, it felt like proof that an act of compassion, once set in motion, could yield ripples beyond what anyone might predict. One particularly bright morning, after a cool rain had freshened the mountain air, Lucas set out on a solo trek to check cameras placed in remote parts of the forest. These cameras were part of a project to monitor local wildlife corridors, ensuring animals could move freely without hindrance from human encroachment. The journey led him along a narrow ridgeline where tall pines opened to breathtaking vistas of rolling hills. Vultures circled high overhead, and the faint sound of water gurgled far below. It was in a grassy clearing, ringed by clusters of blackberries and wildflowers, that he first noticed fresh tracks distinctive, large bear prints pressed into the soft earth. He knelt down, pressing his palm against one of the impressions, feeling the gentle give of the soil. The prints were wide and deep, likely recent. His pulse quickened. The spacing suggested a bear of considerable size, and the smaller tracks alongside them hinted at younger bears. A jolt of hope coursed through him. Could it be the same family he'd helped rescue? Was the scarred male still guiding the mother and her offspring through safe, fertile grounds? Careful not to spook any wildlife that might be nearby, Lucas moved quietly, taking one deliberate step after another, following the tracks deeper into the woods. Before long, he found an area where the brush had been flattened. Berry-laden branches drooped with missing fruit. The stems bore teeth marks, and the leaves had been trampled as if by small, energetic paws. The entire clearing smelled of damp earth and faint musk, a sure sign that bears had recently feasted there. A rush of gratitude swelled in Lucas's chest. He pictured the mother with a new litter, rummaging for berries while the older cubs scampered around her, learning the timeless rhythms of survival. He imagined the scarred male hovering nearby in the shadows, watchful and protective in a way that defied common law about solitary black bears. The idea that these creatures could forge a semblance of familial closeness was yet another reminder that nature often held more mysteries and tender truths than textbooks could fully capture. Later that day, Lucas paused by a slow-moving stream. He stood beneath a canopy of sun-dappled leaves, listening to the water. Though he didn't see the bears, he found a worn patch of grass at the water's edge, where small footprints clustered a place the cubs might have played, splashing in the shallows, reveling in the carefree exhilaration of a warm spring day. The scene conjured a flood of memories: the mother's blood-matted fur, the frantic rush to save her, and the scarred male standing guard, trusting Lucas to do what was right. That night, back at his cabin, Lucas recorded each finding in a battered notebook he'd once used during his ranger training. He made sketches of the paw prints, scribbled notes about the berry bushes, and tucked a few photographs from his trail cameras into the pages. The images were grainy but told a clear story. A sizable black bear, its left shoulder sporting a long-healed scar, accompanied by a sleek female whose side still bore faint, patchy fur where scar tissue showed through. Trailing them were 4 cubs of various ages, 2 nearly the size of yearlings, and 2 smaller ones that had to be only a few months old. Seeing the family thriving like this brought an unshakable sense of relief and wonder. Word spread quickly among the conservation community. Many marveled at how, in less than 2 years, this mother bear had not only survived serious injury, but successfully given birth again. Others cautioned that black bears typically had litters every 2 years, sometimes longer, implying this was either a remarkable case of resilience or simply proof that she'd mated again earlier than expected. For Lucas, the mechanics of it mattered less than the living proof that compassion and proper care could alter the trajectory of a wild creature's life so profoundly. He also saw how this news intrigued the locals. People who once viewed bears with mild apprehension began to ask Lucas earnest questions about bear behavior, about how they could better coexist, and about what steps they should take to protect both themselves and these animals. Gradually, a subtle shift took place in the community's perception of the forest and its inhabitants. Motivated by the bear's story, Lucas collaborated with Bethany and a few other rangers to organize local workshops where residents learned about bear-safe trash containers, the importance of not feeding wildlife, and ways to appreciate these animals from a respectful distance. Attendance soared. Where only a handful of curious souls might have shown up in the past, now entire families came, eager to learn from the man who had once rescued a wounded bear and who had, in turn, been led by that same bear to rescue others. Over time, Lucas noticed a blossoming hope in people's eyes. Perhaps it was because the simple act of saving a wounded bear had resulted in multiple new lives that each represented a renewed promise for the forest's future. Or maybe it was because the story underscored that empathy, even between species, could reshape destinies in ways no one could have foretold. In his quieter moments, Lucas couldn't help but compare the bear's story to his own. He too had arrived in Pisgah National Forest, wounded in spirit, grieving the loss of his father, grappling with life's uncertainties. By caring for that first wounded bear, he'd inadvertently begun to heal aspects of himself he hadn't even realized were broken. Now, seeing how the mother thrived and multiplied, he felt a sense of closure and renewal, as though each new bear cub was a living testament to the ripple effects of kindness. Days turned into weeks, and he continued to track the bear's movements by camera and by foot. He rarely caught a direct glimpse of them. Bears were still cautious creatures, especially around humans, but he saw their prints and droppings, heard occasional rustlings in the underbrush, and sometimes, on particularly quiet dawns, caught distant glimpses of silhouettes moving gracefully through the towering pines. Yes, the scars they bore were reminders of past dangers, poachers, traps, and bullets, but their ongoing survival, particularly the mother's blossoming family, spoke of hope stronger than fear. And in those forests thick with memories, where the beams of sunlight danced between ancient trees, Lucas understood that they were all part of a grand design, man, bear, forest, each shaping and sustaining the other. And so, chapter after chapter, the growing bear family thrived. And so, too, did Lucas's own spirit, as he nurtured an unspoken bond that defied explanation, yet lit a path forward, one defined by reverence for nature, empathy for all living creatures, and an unyielding belief that kindness might always find a way to flourish. 2 more years slipped by in relative peace. Lucas, now in his mid-40s, had gathered a small group of dedicated conservationists around him. The Ranger Service, bolstered by local support, managed to crack down on a ring of poachers. Arrests were made, a wave of relief washed through the region. Though wildlife-human conflicts never fully disappeared, the area seemed safer than it had been in years. One fateful autumn afternoon, Lucas was assisting a graduate researcher with tagging a new population of elk introduced to the region. With their day's work done, they began the trek back. A sudden sense of urgency tugged at Lucas's consciousness, a faint echo, a stirring in the crisp air. He convinced the researcher to wait while he detoured off the path, following an instinct he couldn't explain. He found himself in a narrow gulch, thick with ferns and overshadowed by towering pines. His heart quickened. Lying in a shallow stream was the scarred male bear, motionless, eyes closed. Panic surged through Lucas. He rushed to the bear's side, calling out to the researcher for help. The bear's breathing was shallow. A deep cut marred its side, possibly from a fight with another animal. Blood tinged the water pink. For a moment, Lucas feared this might be the end. Memories flooded back of the day he had found the bear so many years ago, its wounded frame, its cries for help. With the researcher's assistance, Lucas cleaned and wrapped the wound. They administered sedatives and basic antibiotics from the emergency kit. The bear stirred, letting out a feeble groan. Time seemed to collapse into that singular moment, like a cosmic reflection of the first time man and bear had crossed paths. Despite the fear, Lucas's hands were steady. He whispered words of encouragement to the bear, uncertain if any meaning could be conveyed. Perhaps it was only a reassurance to himself that all creatures deserve another chance. Just like his father had once taught him, the hours crept by. The sun began to set, painting the sky a vivid palette of orange and crimson. The researcher and Lucas managed to stabilize the bear enough to move it to higher ground. They called in a team of wildlife medics, much like Lucas had done for the female years before. It was a grueling process of waiting and hoping. Miraculously, the bear clung to life with the same fierce tenacity that had once powered its recovery under Lucas's care. The medics transported it to the now well-equipped rehabilitation center. There, under careful observation, the bear's wound was treated and fluid therapy began. For days, Lucas camped near the center, refusing to leave until he knew the outcome. Each morning, he checked on the scarred bear, studying its slow but steady recovery. Each night, he slept under the open sky, gazing up at the stars, thinking about the bond they shared, a bond that had spanned nearly a decade and 2 remarkable rescues. At long last, the veterinarians declared the bear stable, though it would need time to regain full strength. Then came the day Lucas had both dreaded and anticipated, the moment of release, where man once again returned the mighty creature to the wild it called home. This time, the farewell was quieter. Only Lucas, Bethany, and a couple of medics were present. They drove deep into the forest, near the same clearing where the family of bears had been released years prior. The scarred bear ambled out of the transport crate, a little stiff, but alive and alert. Lucas watched, heart pounding, as the bear walked a few paces, sniffed the air, and then turned back. Their eyes met in one last, lingering moment. It felt like a silent acknowledgement of everything they had been through. Then, with a low, resonant groan, the bear lumbered into the tree line and vanished, the golden shafts of sunlight enveloping it like a benediction. Months passed without further incidents. Lucas busied himself with new conservation projects, checking up on the elk population and continuing his forest survival classes. He had all but convinced himself that his final farewell with the scarred bear was exactly that, a conclusion to a decade-long chapter of his life. Then, in the bloom of spring, an urgent message reached him from Bethany. An elderly hiker had gone missing. The Forest Service launched a search operation, and Lucas was asked to assist. Equipped with maps, survival gear, and his deep knowledge of remote paths, Lucas joined the rescue teams, combing through dense undergrowth and rocky ravines. After 2 days, hopes of finding the hiker alive began to wane. The nights were cold, and the old man had little more than a light jacket. Still, Lucas pressed on, determined. On the 3rd morning, he decided to check a lesser-known path near a steep canyon. Trudging through thick brush, he found himself constantly scanning the ground for footprints. Then, a noise caught his attention, an odd rustling and low panting. Cautiously, he pushed aside some branches and came face to face with the scarred male bear. The bear's fur bristled, and it let out a throaty huff. For a split second, Lucas feared it might attack. Then he noticed the bear wasn't looking at him. It was glancing behind itself, deeper into the vegetation, as though beckoning him again. A wave of déjà vu washed over Lucas. Could this truly be happening again? He followed, heart pounding, keeping a safe distance. The bear led him around a tangle of roots, down a precarious slope, to a narrow ledge near the canyon wall. And there, pressed against the stone, lay the missing hiker, injured, weak, barely conscious. Adrenaline surged. Lucas radioed the search party, giving his precise coordinates. The hiker's leg was pinned under a rock, and his face was drawn with pain and dehydration. As gently as he could, Lucas freed the leg, assessing the broken bone. The old man stirred, eyes fluttering open, confused at the sight of the enormous black bear just a few feet away. "It's all right," Lucas murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure if he was addressing the hiker or the bear. The scarred male stood watch, tension in every muscle, but it never moved closer. Within 30 minutes, a helicopter hovered overhead and a rescue team descended. The bear let out a sharp bark of alarm as the whirring blades whipped the air. Lucas worried it might spook, but the bear lingered, as if making sure the hiker was in capable hands. Only when the medics began loading the old man onto a stretcher did the bear slowly retreat into the forest, its dark silhouette merging with the shadows. That evening, as the missing hiker was airlifted to the nearest hospital, news of the extraordinary incident rippled through the ranger station. The man had been alive thanks, in no small part, to the strange intervention of the scarred bear. Lucas could hardly believe it himself. Somewhere along the line, it seemed that this wild creature had learned to trust humans enough to lead Lucas to another life that needed saving. The roles were reversed. Once upon a time, Lucas had saved the bear. Now, indirectly, the bear had saved a human. In the forest's silent language, it was a gift of mutual mercy, a final, shocking surprise that transcended the boundaries between species and reminded everyone who heard the story that compassion could indeed come full circle in the most unexpected ways. The events became local legend. Rangers, hikers, and townsfolk alike spoke in hushed tones of the scarred black bear that once was rescued and, in turn, helped rescue a man. Lucas found himself uncomfortable with the attention. To him, the story was less about heroism and more about the wondrous capacity of living beings to forge bonds beyond logic. In the weeks following the incident, Lucas received countless requests for interviews, appearances, and offers to write articles or even books. He turned most of them down, choosing instead to remain in the forest, continuing his daily routine. He found solace under the tall pines and along the babbling streams, content in the knowledge that he and the scarred bear had changed each other's lives in ways neither could have predicted. He did accept one invitation, a conservation gala organized by a reputable wildlife foundation. Standing at a podium, he shared his experiences, carefully omitting the location details that might endanger the bear. He concluded with an impassioned plea for more responsible environmental stewardship, urging everyone in attendance to fight against poaching and the destruction of habitats. The crowd responded with thunderous applause. Lucas felt a surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, the world could shift toward a more harmonious relationship with nature. And so, life moved on. Lucas grew older, lines of wisdom etching themselves deeper into his face. Yet the forest around him stayed in flux, cyclical in its rebirth. Leaves grew, withered, and fell, rivers swelled and receded, and animals lived and died. Through it all, the invisible bond he shared with the scarred bear remained a cornerstone of his existence. Lucas never again encountered the scarred bear directly after that day in the canyon, but he often sensed its presence. In quiet moments, he believed he could hear distant footfalls on the forest floor or low choughs carried on the breeze. He occasionally stumbled upon new paw prints or found fresh claw marks on a towering tree trunk. Each sign felt like a whisper, a reminder that the forest was alive with wonders beyond human comprehension. He passed by the old enclosure behind his cabin, where he had once nursed the wounded bear all those years ago. The memories were as vivid as ever, tending to the torn flesh, feeling the thrum of the bear's heartbeat, forging a fragile trust between man and beast. It was impossible to forget. Sometimes, when the wind rushed through the pine needles and the morning sun caressed the forest floor, just so, Lucas felt the bear was watching him from the shadows, a silent guardian. Their story had transcended the ordinary, becoming a living testament that compassion has the power to ripple through time, binding people and animals together in an unbreakable chain of empathy. And in this final reflection, Lucas understood that the greatest surprise of all was not simply that the bear had returned to him or that it had guided him to a lost hiker. It was that every act of kindness, every effort to save a life, enriches the soul in ways that cannot be measured. What began as a moment of shared vulnerability had blossomed into a lifelong journey of growth, resilience, and unspoken kinship. That is the incredible saga of Lucas Treadwell and the wounded bear he once saved, only to see it return with a life-changing surprise of its own. Their bond became an inspiring example of how a single act of compassion can reverberate through time, touching not just the lives of two very different beings, but an entire community. If this story has moved you, if it has reminded you of the power of empathy, the importance of preserving our wild places, and the magic that can unfold when humans and nature meet in harmony, then please take a moment to support the channel. Like this video, share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss another uplifting tale. Together, we can spread hope, protect the wild, and celebrate the extraordinary connections that exist in our beautiful world.